iDriveSoCal is brought to you by the very best auto retailers from across Southern California. When it's time for you to buy, or even just kick the tires on the idea of buying, just go to iDriveSoCal.com and click on dealers. iDriveSoCal.com, click on dealers, and get connected. Now, on with the podcast.
It's a fact of life. You have to get into a car to go places. So the needs are huge here to have better solutions to mobility. And then you have this critical mass of a market of 10 million auto mobility consumers in a LA county, which is enormous. But you have other things that I think will make it the sort of world capital of transportation technology. It's not a coincidence that Elon Musk, who's probably the one person in the entire world who is really thinking big things about how you move, whether it's underground or to Mars or across LA or in a Hyperloop or in a Tesla. He lives here. All of his activities are, if you think about it, are kind of about Los Angeles region. LA, of course, is a great tech startup center now.
Sure.
Silicon Beach. And you combine that with the big technology advances that are being developed in California. It makes this area incredibly exciting and the logical place to bring global leaders to talk about the future of mobility.
Welcome to iDriveSoCal, the podcast all about mobility in the automotive capital of the United States, Southern California. I'm your host, Tom Smith, and today I'm joined by John Rossant. John is the founder of New Cities, which is an organization that put on a first ever event here in Southern California, right here in LA, called LA CoMotion. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks a lot, Tom.
So let's start just a highline. LA CoMotion is...
LA CoMotion is it's actually a global gathering of the movers and shakers driving the mobility revolution. And we strongly believe that we are on the cusp, if not fully inside, a vast mobility revolution, which will radically change how we human beings move around cities, move around countries, how goods get around, etc. And I think we think it's going to be one of the big things impacting what cities look like over the next few decades, and will really, I think, change many of our lives.
Well, we definitely need it here.
I can say that. I totally agree.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal getting around Southern California, LA especially. So, New Cities is the organization that put on LA CoMotion. And from what I understand, there's other events that you've done through New Cities in other parts of the world.
Well, New Cities Foundation it's a nonprofit foundation. We're actually headquartered in Montreal, Canada. Okay. And we look at the future of cities and how to make cities more dynamic, more connected, more healthy, more sustainable. We work with a large, very, very wide variety of global organizations, both private sector like Google, Verizon, Ericsson, Cisco, so a lot of big technology companies, but also a lot of smaller startups, etc.
Sure.
We work with other nonprofit institutions in universities, whether it's MIT or NYU, and we believe that to advance the conversation, it's really good to bring the key stakeholders to the table.
Yeah.
And the thing about cities, when you look at cities, is that no one really owns the city. It by definition, it's a collaborative effort.
Right.
And so we feel as a kind of non-profit institution with really no skin in the game, in a sense, we do have the ability to bring people who might not be talking to each other so naturally, we bring them together. And so we have a big annual meeting called the New City Summit, which gathers around 1,000 city leaders. It's been in a different global city every year. We had our last one in Korea last June. But we've been focused more and more as a foundation on the whole issue of mobility and transportation. As I said, there is a revolution afoot. We think every city on earth will be impacted by that. So we began to look, starting around 4 or 5 years ago, at the future of urban mobility. How will we get around cities in 10 years and 20 years, et cetera? Because 4 or 5 years ago, if you remember, Uber had sort of burst on the scene out of nowhere.
Yep.
And suddenly the Uber, this company was worth $1 billion. I mean, now it's, I don't know, 70 billion.
Right.
But, and also people were just starting to talk about autonomous vehicles. And we thought, something is really happening. So we organized a small conference with the basic idea of let's bring the kind of 150 or 200 smartest people in the world who think about the future of mobility. Let's bring them together. And so we had the first little conference up in Mountain View, actually at Google headquarters.
Okay.
They were very generous in giving us a hall to have this. And then we did another edition a year later in London, England, where we worked with the...
So what year was that first conference?
It was about 4 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah. And then a year later in London. Last year in November, we met in Tokyo. But at the same time, starting about 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, Tom, we started looking at what was happening here in Los Angeles. And if you remember, the city of Los Angeles, Mayor Garcetti and the city council had issued a remarkable report called the Mobility 2035 Plan, which looked at, was kind of blueprint for the future mobility of Los Angeles till 2035. And it was absolutely remarkable. And it came across my desk. And I thought, wow, this is not the LA that I used to know of, traffic jams on freeways and smog and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
This is a radically different future. And so I came out here and what became soon very obvious was that this will emerge as one of the key epicenters of the mobility revolution. As you said yourself, Southern California is the biggest automotive space in the United States.
I think
far.
Detroit's going to be upset when they hear that moniker that I've given it, but that's okay.
But, I think there are not as many people in the Detroit area. And it's here you have more cars than people. Yeah. And it's a city and a region that is obsessed by mobility and transportation for good and bad reasons.
It's a must.
It's a must because it's a fact of life. You have to get into a car to go places. But so the needs are huge here to have better solutions to mobility. At the same time, you have, and then you have this critical mass of a market of 10 million, auto mobility consumers in a LA County, which is enormous. And then you have other things that I think will make it the sort of world capital of transportation technology, which is how Eric Garcetti says it. And that is, you have the whole heritage of the aerospace industry here, which is also about mobility. It's about getting from point A to point B aerially. But you have that know-how, which can be very much transferred to, terrestrial mobility. You have, it's not a coincidence that Elon Musk, who's probably the one person in the entire world who is really thinking big things about how you move, whether it's underground or to Mars or across LA or in a Hyperloop or in a Tesla. He lives here. All of his activities are, if you think about it, are kind of about Los Angeles region. All the Hyperloop companies which he spawned are based here, etc. There's LA, of course, is a great tech startup center now. Silicon Beach, it's the third in the United States. It's very, very vibrant. And you also have, and I think this cannot be underestimated at all, you have a generation of enlightened and visionary public servants, starting with Eric Garcetti, but including other mayors around and city officials in LA County, plus Salida Reynolds, who's the general manager of the LA Department of Transportation, absolutely visionary person. And so you have put all of that together, and you combine that with the big technology advances that are being developed in California. Maybe not all here, obviously up in the valley. But they're being deployed here at scale. So it makes this area incredibly exciting and the logical place to bring global leaders to talk about the future of mobility.
talk a little bit about how John came to found New Cities, and then we'll get back here to LA CoMotion.
Well, I had been actually based in Europe, and my previous activity was I was the guy putting together a very big high-level conference every year called the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
Yeah.
Where global leaders, both public sector and private, meet the end of every January every year, and it's one of the big important meetings in the globe.
Heard of it.
And so I had to put that together. I had to produce it for quite a few years. And one of my, starting around 15 years ago, kind of realized that cities in many ways would be the next big thing, because there was an absolute tsunami of populations moving into cities, particularly in East Asia, South Asia, the Middle East, that was really unprecedented in human history. For the first time, the world population passed to majority of us now live in cities rather than rural areas. So this was we absolutely had to get, and we have to get cities right if we are to survive as a human species. And I think I was maybe felt, I guess, more and more that city issues and looking at questions of urbanization got kind of short shrift in Davos in the event I was doing, and really I felt that we needed a very focused discussion on the future of cities, and that's what led me about 8 or 9 years ago to set up the New Cities Foundation as an independent nonprofit global institution looking at ways to improve cities. And
as that was becoming a thing, events such as LA CoMotion was part of the plan?
No. That was quite a long time ago. No, it was not really. I mean, we organized and we still organize our big annual meeting of the foundation, which is called the New City Summit, which looks at many different themes, from Internet of Things to governance to power sector to mobility in cities. But more and more, I think, in the last few years, we thought, the mobility thing is becoming so important and so central to what cities are going to become in the future, that we had to really focus on that. And LA, as I said, is just the natural place for that very high level conversation. At high level, but also very practical level, because what's been wonderful to see over these past few days are the hundreds, if not thousands, of Angelenos who've come here to learn about the future and learn about what's coming down the pike, and in a very genuine way, an open way.
Yep.
And the vibe is, and the atmosphere has just been great.
So that's a natural lead into the success of the first year's event. Tell me about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, we structure it so it's a 4-day event. The first 2 days are kind of high-level, invitation-only, a very, very dense conference program of leaders from around the world. A lot of bilateral meetings. I mean, people who used LA CoMotion to, whether it's, the Minister of Transportation of Denmark who was here meeting with a Brazilian architect, or something like that. So, hundreds of these kinds of meetings. So that was Thursday and Friday. And then the idea was to open up the event to the general public, free of charge, on Saturday and Sunday. And there's another conference program, very, very rich. I mean, there's we worked with the city to close down an entire street for 5 days, Colleton Street in the Arts District. So there are lots of, you can test drive tons of new kinds of electronic scooters, autonomous cars, there's an autonomous van. There's all kinds of gear that you can, motorized skateboards, lots of very, very, very cool things.
So, and on that note, I mentioned one of the scooter companies out there. I think they call it a scooter. I know the founder, and I'm going to hopefully get a ride on the scooter. But one of the things that he mentioned to me ties into what I wanted to ask you about, and that is we're moving at like breakneck speed with things that in the past regulations and governmental bodies would have just like put up brick walls, it seems. And I use this instance, and this isn't government, this is commerce, but my friend's company, Ojo Scooters, I believe, or Ojo Electric, I'm not sure what it's called. They, in 3 months, got a deal done with Ford.
Yeah.
With Ford, globally. A 3-month deal globally with Ford? I mean...
Yeah, well, Tom, that's you put your finger on it, because I think what's so fascinating about this sector is exactly how fast-moving it now is becoming. And, 2 years ago, you could talk about electric cars, electric scooters. It just sort of was beginning to happen, but was very slow. Now it's everything is happening quickly. And what's interesting about on the regulatory side, I mean, Ford is a private sector group.
Right.
Ojo, which I love, by the way, and I'd love to talk about that because it's an interesting example of designed in the United States, these great products. But the regulatory, on the regulatory side, things are moving quickly too. If you think about 4 or 5 years ago, the Department of Transportation in Washington had not even woken up to autonomous vehicles.
Right.
I mean, the words autonomous vehicles or driverless cars were not even used by the Department of Transportation. Right. Now the House and the Senate in Washington have just passed, incredibly forward-looking legislation regarding how autonomous vehicles can be used and tested on roads in the United States. So things are really moving quickly now.
In the next episode of iDriveSoCal, my conversation with John Rossant of New Cities and LA CoMotion continues.
Let's say you're flying in to the LA Olympics in 2028. You will have a driverless taxi. Will pick you up because you would have ordered it when you're getting off the plane. It'll pick you up curbside at Terminal 6 at LAX, whisk you to your hotel. Traffic jams will be this sort of quaint historic memory by that point. You'll order a flying driverless taxi from the Uber-NASA joint venture called Uber Air Taxis.
You heard right. A flying driverless taxi will be brought to us by a joint venture between Uber and NASA. And that's predicted for just 10 years from right now. That and more coming up on the next iDriveSoCal. Until then, I'm Tom Smith. Thanks for listening. This episode of iDriveSoCal was engineered by Micah Palmquist and J-Dubs produced on site.